Okay, because of he was genuinely seeking God. He believed that it must be something more than just following the routine. And finally he discovered that, how, its salvation is by grace through faith, that kind of things. And so it became a big movement, the Protestant movement, okay? But then it becomes very efficient and it's growing. But again, if we don't pass it on to us generation that, hey, we really need to seek God, pretty soon, Christianity, or even for us in the Protestant group, it becomes a monument. It becomes, again, just another rituals, and it could be a deadly thing. Okay, and then not number three. This is an example that I mentioned to you before. When we think about Blockbuster, right? They fail. They went bankrupt because they were relying so much on their past successes. In the 80s, when they started, they became the king right away of the video rental, okay? And then they just did not adapt. And so now they have gone bankrupt. They closed most of their stores because of competition, and they're not adapting to the changing environment. They kept on thinking, this is how it works in the 80s. We are the king. We're so successful. So they believe that it's going to happen. And I remember reading a book from, it's about a paradigm shift. And the author was giving one illustration about the Swiss watchmaker. The Swiss watchmaker are very famous, as you know, that Swiss watches are very expensive and so on. But back in the early last centuries, all the watches were made like with using all those springs and mechanisms, and they just felt like this is the only way how we make watches. And then finally, one guy came out with the new invention or discovery of the quartz, the technology. And that, I can't remember where that person is from, but when he presented that quartz system, okay, technology, to the Swiss watchmaker, all the Swiss watchmaker laughed at that. They says, we don't need this, the quartz system, okay? And so they kind of laughed at it, and then guess what happened? The Japanese bought the patent. And pretty soon, you know what happened. Seiko and other Japanese companies, adapted that technology, and they just outpaced the Swiss watchmaker because the Swiss were just too complacent. They think that, hey, this is the way we always make watches. It's been successful, and they refuse to see that, things can work differently. And so another way in which a church dies is when we become to worship our past. And what I mean by that is that the difference between number 2 and number 3 is that in number 2, we're depending on our past success. But in number 3, I'm referring to that we begin to worship, or we begin to focus more on the system rather than on the people. We begin to focus more on the programs more than focusing on Christ. And so a church can do that. We're trying to follow the purpose-driven church, for instance. Okay, it's a wonderful system. Okay, it's a wonderful paradigm. The worship, fellowship, discipleship, ministry, and then mission. Okay, but if we fall in love with the system, the structure more than what is supposed to, than the worship of the Lord, and falling in love with God, or focusing the people more, instead of the more than focusing on the program more than people, then the church can also die by doing that. Okay. This is basically pretty much like the Martha and Mary. We need both, of course, in ministries, but Jesus was basically saying that, hey, for this particular case, he's saying that Mary desired the better one, okay, and that is to be close with him, intimate with him. And another point is that when we are not sensitive to our own spiritual condition, okay, again, usually this happens when we are very comfortable, and we don't recognize that we are actually we are decaying, that we are actually dying. And I think the best example for that, of course, is Samson and Delilah. Okay, Samson was given a wonderful gift from God, a gift of strength, and with a purpose to deliver God's people. But he began to be complacent, and he began to take God's gift for granted. And so when he began to flirt around with his gifts, with the situation, thinking that his strength will always be there, thinking that his strength will always get him out of trouble. And so, he became drunk, and then he didn't realize that he was being seduced, And then when Delilah finally asked, what is the secret of your strength? He finally gave up that secret. And so she cuts his hair. And if you remember, after 3 times, and then finally Delilah said to him this thing, the same words. And she said, let's look at this. And she said, the Philistines are upon you, Samson. So he awoke from his sleep and said, I will go out as before at other times and shake myself free. But he did not know that the Lord had departed from him. So here we see a perfect example of a man of God, who's been given a mission and a gift to fulfill that mission, but he took it for granted. He didn't realize that his lifestyle was leading him towards destruction. And then so because he was taking it for granted, eventually he thought that he can get himself out, out of that trouble, a predicament, but he didn't realize that God left them. Church, if I ask you, what is the secret of Samson's power? Strength. I think most of us will, we all remember the story from the Bible that his strength came from his hair. But if you think about it even deeper, actually his strength is not from his hair, because to me the prohibition from him to cut his hair and to drink alcohol or strong drinks was simply a symbol. It's a symbol that he is supposed to be separated unto God. Do you see that? It's not the hair itself. It's funny, right? I mean, the hair, it's not the longer hair and you get more strength. It's a symbol to us, that for us as Christians, that what God was expecting from Samson was that he is supposed to lead a holy life, separated, different than the world. That's why God doesn't want him to have a haircut and drink the strong drinks. And so I want to encourage us as a church that our strength is not in our education. I'm not against education. We need to be educated. Our strength is not in our monies or in our abilities or our titles. Our strength is because when we rely on God and said, I am a holy person. I am being called out from this world. I will not live the same way as the world, as my friends in the world are doing. I have been separated unto the Lord. And because of that lifestyle, because I am committed to the Lord, just like Daniel, Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego, who did not defile himself with the king's rich food, because of that, they received a special anointing or strength in a sense, and they were delivered from the fiery fire. And so don't look at the hair as, what's weird? Why is it just the hair? God can use anything. But I think the symbolism that we could learn here, church, from Samson is not so much the hair, but it's that the fact that he was supposed to be separated. Just like we are supposed to be separated from this world and not to live according to the world's ways. And so lastly, I would say that a church will be dead or dying when it is divided from within. I alluded yesterday to some of you that in Matthew chapter 12, if you remember, that Jesus was a demoniac man was brought to him who was deaf and blind, and then or mute and blind, and Jesus healed him. And then the Pharisees began to complain and say, this guy really cast out demons from using the power of Beelzebub. But Jesus, knowing their thoughts, this is what he said. But Jesus, knowing their thoughts, said to them, every kingdom divided against itself is brought to desolation. And every city or house divided against itself will not stand. Okay? So I think this is common sense. God is basically saying, look, if you're fighting inside, eventually you're going to fall apart. That's why I said to you earlier that no church usually die because they were attacked from outside. But usually it's when we are divided, when we fall apart, it's because of within. I fellowship with many pastors, from the Indonesian fellowship, the SBTC fellowship, and I have another fellowship. I meet pastors regularly for fellowships. And it's interesting when I meet with the Indonesian pastors, they tell me, we talk about things that's happening in Indonesia or about Indonesian churches and so on. And many of the stories I hear, it's kind of scary because, they will say that something in this line, that most churches that split up, they didn't split up because they were attacked from outside. They didn't split up because the Muslim come in and, hey, you got to split up, okay? Or something like that. It's because they were fighting inside. And then it created a split. And when I was in seminary, I took one course on missiology. And I remember a mission professor said that, do you know what is the number one reason why missionaries will go home, return from the mission field,